name is Andrea. I will be presenting Chapter 3 of an Introduction to Black Studies. From enslavement to the Civil War, Lemuel Haynes was born July 18, 1753. He is the son of an African and Scottish mother. Haynes was raised as an enslaved man of color by John Haynes until he was 5 months of age. Haynes' main goal was to join the clergy, but this was put on hold due to the coming of the American Revolution. Haynes was encouraged to join the military service as the first Minutemen of Massachusetts after the battles of Lexington and Concord, and then in George Washington's army during the 1755 attack on Boston. In 1775, Haynes wrote the political ballad, The Battle of Lexington. Throughout this, he spoke about the British colonies in North America that had been manipulated, corrupted, and oppressed by King George III and Parliament. Once the American Revolution ended, Haynes dedicated his life to spreading the gospel throughout the new nation. He was then ordained in 1785. His final post was at the Greenville Congregational Church in New York in 1822. He died in 1832. Setting the stage, this is a quote by W.E.B. Du Bois. In Ethiopia, the sunrise of human culture took place, spreading down into the Nile Valley. Ethiopia, the land of the blacks, was thus the cradle of Egyptian civilization. We continue to see that there is a debate on whether ancient cultures thought in terms of race and ethnicity. Life in West Africa was lineage-based and centered on farming. A lineage could be patrilineal or matrilineal. Matrilineal refers to this descent, inheritance, and family identity through the female line, as patrilineal refers to the male line. West Africans lived in regions that were not organized as states but governed by a monarch. It is stated that even though these monarchs did not have absolute power, they still commanded the army, were able to tax commerce, and amass enormous wealth. Before the involvement of the Europeans, there was no racial component to the slave trade. The Atlantic slave trade and the Middle Passage. Portuguese initially traded gold, ivory, and pepper. It was later that they then became involved in the slave trade. The Atlantic slave trade was dominated by the Portuguese and Spanish. Once the trade was abolished, the total was approximately 12 million. The passage was the leg that carried enslaved people across the Atlantic. There was much danger as these trades occurred. Dangers involving health were a huge issue due to the casualties that were in the wars that were being transported. Mortality rates were extremely high due to the overcrowded conditions, unsanitary environment, and threat of disease. 1/3 of the African captives survived the Middle Passage. African Americans in colonial North America. 75% of individuals crossing the Atlantic Ocean after the arrival of Christopher Columbus were African. In Virginia, where there was only 32 people of African descent living in 1619, enslaved Africans constituted about 20% of the overall population by 1700. The reason for this shift was the precedent for the enslavement of Africans set in the British Caribbean. The institutions of slavery had been resisted in the English North American colonies. The English had no laws governing and not much experience governing slaves. African Americans during the struggle for independence and its aftermath. A royal proclamation of 1763 limited colonial expansion westward. Once amending acts were passed, the independence movement had begun. This led to the outbreak of the American Revolution in 1776. African Americans were forbidden to enlist in the military, whether they were free or enslaved. About 1,000 African Americans joined the British in response to this. Overall, of the 300,000 men who fought on the colonist side, roughly 5,000 were black. Black American culture had existed in the United States. This led to many institutions, one of them being Freemasonry. This appealed to African American men due to it espoused them to the ideals of liberty and equality. During this time, black lodges were founded. These lodges were important due to the connection between lodges in different cities. Another institution that was created was the Mutual Aid Society. This was a foundation of social welfare and provided relief from different difficulties. They provided their members with a variety of services such as medical care, burial assistance, and help for widows and orphans. African Americans and the New Nation, the Northwest Ordinance, approved the orderly sale of land, free public education, a territorial government structure, the, the eventual formation of several new states, and the immediate ban of slavery in the region. This was passed in 1787. The Three-Fifths Compromise allowed states to count 3/5 of their slave population toward their population. The Fugitive Slave Act in 1793 allowed slaveholders or their representatives to pursue fugitives across state lines, capture them, and take them before a magistrate to retain legal custody of their property. The Cotton Kingdom. The cotton gin was invented by Eli Whitney in 1793. This made cotton profitable and thus the most important crop in the United States until the outbreak of the Civil War, driving the Southern economy. From 1790 to 1860, the enslaved African American population in the region that stretched from the Atlantic coast to Texas grew almost 6 times, about 700,000 to 4 million. Very few enslaved people resided in western North Carolina, eastern Tennessee, western Virginia, and Missouri. The fastest growing slave populations were found in Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Virginia. About 55% of the enslaved population of the South cultivated cotton, 10% grew tobacco, another 10% grew rice and hemp and produced sugar, 15% were house servants, and the last 10% worked in trade or in industry. Tobacco continued to be the most important cash crop in Kentucky, Maryland, North Carolina, Virginia, and parts of Missouri. Many of the skilled laborers who were hired out worked in southern towns and cities where they had the opportunity of interacting with free Black Americans. Enslaved people developed their own semi-autonomous communities that had family. Marriages weren't legal, but they recognized marriage and family. They often had, they often shared homes on their master's plantation and relied on each other, especially, and instilled those beliefs in their children. The lead up to Civil War, the first Great Awakening swept Britain and its North American colonies in the 1730s to 40s. This movement lasted through the 1830s. the Second Great Awakening, hundreds of Americans to move their moral crusade into the political world. The message of spiritual equality greatly influenced the establishment of independent African American churches. Separate Black congregations were established, usually headed by a Black minister, but they were still under the umbrella of a white denomination. It was only in the North that an independent Black church movement emerged. These churches became part of the largest anti-slavery movement that was spreading throughout the country. This terrified white slave owners that already lived in constant fear of rebellion. Nat Turner led a revolt where about 50 plus white men, women, and children were killed. The lead up to Civil War. Paul Cuffe took over 38 Black Americans to Sierra Leone on his own dime. Many African Americans and abolitionists opposed of the project due to colonization. Some whites were in favor of it and saw it as a ridding of the nation of Blacks. They claimed that they would be happier in Africa and not experience discrimination. Others saw it as a Christianizing and civilizing of Africa. African Americans in the Civil War. It took Lincoln 2 years to change his mind about allowing Blacks to serve in the military and the issue of slavery. There were many factors that influenced his thinking. Abolitionists, number one being that abolitionists from the North were disappointed by the decision to exclude African Americans from the military. The desire of African Americans to assist in the preservation of the Union. Number three, the Union Army began to use some of the hundreds of enslaved persons that fled to the North. Number four, perception that the government cared more of the interest of Confederate slaveholders than the interest of Blacks in bondage. It was only after the first year of war that Lincoln began to move away from the position. January 1st, 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation. This released about 4 million enslaved African Americans. The Emancipation Proclamation authorized the service of African Americans in the Union Army. Thank you all for watching me present Chapter 3. Have a good day.